Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I would like to call to order the special meeting of the school board on Monday, September 22nd at 5:00 p.m. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mrs. Bell.
Here.
Mrs. Hancock.
Here.
Mr. Kuchert.
Here.
Mr. Lackner.
Here.
Mrs. McCabe.
Here.
Dr. Rich.
Here.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and do we have any citizen comments at this time? No. Okay, moving then to our next item on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn to closed session for the purpose of the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or a volunteer of the public body, or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe. Can I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Kuchert. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mrs. Hancock.
Yes.
Mr. Kuchert.
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe.
Yes.
Dr. Rich.
Yes.
Mrs. Bell.
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. And now we will adjourn to closed session at 5:02 p.m. Okay, it is Monday, September 22nd. The board is now back in open session. It is 5:59 PM. Ms. Marsan, can you please take the roll call?
Mrs. Bell?
Here.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mr. Kuschert?
Here.
Mr. Lackner?
Here.
Mrs. McCabe?
Here.
Dr. Rich?
Here.
Mrs. Fairgrave?
Here. Can I have a motion to adjourn the September 22nd, 2025 school board meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs.
Second.
McCabe. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Kuschert. Ms. Marsan, please take the roll call vote.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Kuschert?
Yes.
Mr. Lackner?
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe?
Yes.
Dr. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave?
Yes, motion passes 7-0. The meeting is adjourned at 5:59 PM.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Learning and Teaching Committee meeting here on September 22nd at 6:02 PM. Do we have any citizen comments? We have no citizen comments. We have one for discussion agenda item that has to do with the student achievement report and planning the progression of that and evolution of that. So I'm going to offer the floor to the board to see if there are any comments or questions as we get started. Seeing none, Ms. Stahl, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Lackner. And thank you all, by the way, for your willingness tonight to engage in this discussion about maybe enhancing our district student achievement report. We are excited to be here with you and gather your input and insight to help build something that really meets everyone's needs. Much of what we bring to you tonight is designed to be a bit of a snapshot of possibilities, if you will, which means we welcome your input as we go. Please don't feel like you need to wait to be prompted. Ask questions, but also feel free to share your opinions and your insight as a board. That insight from you as a board is going to be incredibly important to our next steps in building out this year's student achievement report for you. We do plan to bring that back at the Learning and Teaching meeting, hopefully in November, if that works for the board. I do want to start with a bit of a disclaimer, if I may. As we worked towards building all of this together, we noticed that this presentation at times can feel highly focused on really state test data, score interpretation, quantitative measures. And while some of us love that and can talk about that for days, we hope that none of it is construed as a lack of focus on the whole individual student and all the complexities that come with meeting each individual student's needs. We've worked pretty diligently to honor our role as monitors of student performance at sort of the macro level so that we can leverage efforts and resources to get them to the individual students. So we know that if we fulfill our role here with a real clarity of focus that we know we'll be able to get from the board, that will be able to create those necessary structures that support students who carefully, our schools who carefully advise our students and monitor their student achievement as well, and their psychosocial needs and what their aspirations are. So I appreciate being able to throw that out there.
Ms.
We're
Dahl,
going to talk about a lot of
before you
numbers.
go on, I'd just like to offer a couple of things. In the planning for this discussion, a couple of things came to not only conversation at this table, but in the agenda planning discussions as well. One of those is that the student performance growth goals that the board adopted will come to an end. We adopted goals through this school year. Those are coming to an end. At the same time, administration has done a good job of thinking hard about what measurement schemes are indicative of student progress. And a lot of that is reflected here. These are early thoughts. And what I wanted to share is that the committee chairs and administration have envisioned a process through the course of this school year, and this represents the first step of that process of saying, are we measuring all the right measures? And then do we have appropriate ambitions for the growth of student performance within those measures? And so this is really a series of conversations that we'll have through learning and teaching through the course of the school year, and tonight's discussion represents really the first of those.
Oops. The structure for tonight's presentation and discussion really will come in three parts. The first part is to establish an understanding of the changed state proficiency levels. Then we'll transition into a discussion on the proposed enhancements to the student achievement report. Finally, we'll share proposed academic goal areas, and really throughout, but certainly also at the end, seek your insight and your guidance as we work through this process.
So as we step into this, it should be noted that we are not here to fully explain or justify any changes that the state has made to performance levels, but we are here to clarify some things that could directly impact our reporting processes for you and also with those who work in our buildings and our students themselves and our families. So we hope the background information here just helps to set the stage, just to create some meaning, so that as we move into those snapshots of possibilities that we could employ going forward, you have that background as well. Also, this first section is not about our D303 data. Like, you're going to see some graphs and data and information, and primarily that's information shared by the state around the changes that they've made to the performance levels. So it's an opportunity for us to use that to hopefully explain the direct impact as we go forward. So we want to clarify what performance levels are and not make any assumptions about what those are. Again, not explaining the state's perspective, but clarifying the change that has been made. As you can see up here, there are representations of IAR. ISA is our science assessment that we give in 5th and 8th grade, and then previously SAT. And one of the things that the state claims to want to do is to right size and also align. So where that alignment and right size impacts us is what we want to try to tease out. So one way to think of this is there's also just some clear messaging and language that's going to become easier for us to monitor. As you look on the screen, you can see that each of those tests have benchmarks set by the state that use different wording. In some cases, there are 4 levels, and those levels don't meet between tests. In some cases, there are 5 levels. And now what they've done is create unified performance levels in order to create a level of consistency, which may actually give us an opportunity to align better throughout our system rather than say just within the IAR test in 3rd through 8th grade. Now we can align across the whole system, across multiple tests. So our first guiding question was really around how do proficiency levels set for us, if you will, at a state or national level impact the interpretation of our data specifically. Now, we felt like it was really important to make clear that we are not basing our goals or performance targets on the state. In fact, they are well below what we would expect for our students, and that continues to be the case. We recognize our accountability to the state, however, and that we exist within the system. So we want to harvest any little nuggets of help we can get from the way they have rearranged performance levels and proficiency levels. As I mentioned, D303 holds itself to a higher standard than state benchmarks, but we're planning on using some state performance levels to give us clues, provide us specific clues about how those proficiency levels change from grade to grade and from content area to content area year to year.
When it comes to student achievement, the meeting proficiency benchmarks are aligned to standards and are therefore not typically linear from grade level to grade level. Upcoming slides will provide a visual representation of the nonlinear wave formed throughout the grade levels, and it helps demonstrate that each year is not created equally relative to the quantity and depth of the skills and standards. This may call for us to consider each cohort of students uniquely as they progress through the grade levels.
So this first graph is here for context, and I want to emphasize that. We're using this as a sort of difficulty index, for lack of a better term. It's less about the actual numbers on the screen and more about the shape of the data that you see in the visual representation before you. It starts to delineate the actual difficulty levels from grade level to grade level as we move. So what you see in front of you is a representation of percentile rank from the old, in this case, math, state benchmarks, and then the new ones. The new ones are in that more solid bluish line. And once again, it's not about the numbers per se, it's about the relative difficulty in achieving proficiency at a specific grade level. So what this shows you is there is a bit of a difference, first of all, from the old to the new, and also from year to year as a student moves through the system. This goes back to what Mr. Buxton was just talking about relative to a linear relationship or not. We see here that the ability to hit a proficiency benchmark changes from grade level to grade level. So indeed, it's not linear. Like many of us think of, we just build our knowledge as we move through a system, as we build grade to grade. When in fact, based on the criteria that's been set up for each of these grade levels, there may be a higher or lower level of proficiency. So you'll notice some shifting from the old to the new. You'll also notice some shifting between the grades as well. Continuing with that, again, relative difficulty is what we're looking at here, a comparison of the old ELA proficiency benchmark, and by that I mean what it takes to hit that meets level compared to the new, specifically for ELA. And again,
Ms. Stahl, when we think about these, which are representative of national data sets, not D303 data sets, we can see some interesting things on the math one between grades 8 and 11, and then some additional flattening here in the ELA on the right-hand side between 8 and 11. And I wonder, when we have when we start to talk about D303 students, we have acceleration of students in terms of the content that they consume. When we think about the test data that we look at here at the board table, if we have a 7th grader who's in geometry, are they tested as a 7th grader or are they tested as a sophomore in high school?
yeah, that's an excellent question. They are tested based on their grade level. So regardless of what course or class that 8th grader is in, they will be tested with the 8th grade IAR test, as opposed to a subject-based test. It's not going to be tied to the fact that you're currently taking algebra, so you take an algebra test. That's not how the system is designed currently, so you would take that 8th grade test. Here we just overlaid both for you, just so that you can see, again, relative difficulty, and also now compared between the math and the ELA. We put some predictive components up here. These are not our predictive components, but ECRA and local organizations have been taking some time to really say, what is the impact of some of these changes? And some of what they're predicting is around perhaps that ELA feeling more accessible to meet proficiency than math. As you can see, the circled numbers, 47 to 62, that feels like a very different benchmark to hit. And also significantly then seeing higher proficiency in ELA when compared to math.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Of course.
So and please correct me if I'm wrong, this seems to be responsive to just declining performance across the state. And I know we're not setting our standards based off of that, and I appreciate that you've stated that on a number of occasions. So other than declining performance, has the state given us an idea as to why the standards are dropping? Did they give any other rationale besides right-sizing and aligning based off of existing performance?
While I don't want to speak for the state, of course, really don't want to speak for the state, but I hear your question.
Yeah.
I think it's a
Better
phenomenal
put,
one.
did they give any other rationale for this besides a reaction to declining performance?
If I can, oh, sorry. I don't know if in this case with this data, you can classify it as declining performance. So if you think of it like, I'm going to go across years and I'm going to learn 5 every year. So third grade to fourth grade, I learn 5. Fourth grade to fifth grade, I learn 5, whatever 5 represents. But the 5 is the same between every year. And what this is showing is that 5 isn't the same between every year. So between this year and this year, kids are going to learn 5, and then this year they have to learn 8, and this year they learn 7, and this year they learn 9. And it's not necessarily representative as kids are declining through that. It's the changes in the test. It's really hard to measure.
So if I could just
Yeah,
clarify,
please.
because that was actually very clear to me based on the graphs here. I guess the standards by which they're being measured have declined, whether it's grade 3, grade 5, grade 7. So I understand that, right, so the etched line versus the solid line.
What do you mean the standards have declined?
So if that is, and if I'm interpreting this correctly, that is meeting state expectations. But in each instance at each grade level, unless I'm reading this incorrectly, those standards have dropped. Is that correct?
I don't think you can classify it as the standards have dropped. I think it goes the other way, in that the difficulty of achieving the standard got more difficult. And think of it inversely. So at that, let's take the ELA 64 in third grade. So that's the 64th percentile. What that means, in order to achieve a meets, you're performing at or above 64% of the students. Okay, and this is a sample size of 100,000, like it's a big, and it's representative of the nation, so it's all sampled in there. And then the next year they say, well, it's actually 60. Okay, so that actually got easier in that we would expect about 40% of the kids across this large sample to meet it. And then the next year it goes to 55, which means we'd expect 45%. You don't necessarily say that kids are doing less. You could say that the difficulty is getting more difficult, or the amount of lift, so to speak, like it went from a 5 to a, you got to learn more stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Mr. Chizar, that's clear to me. I see what you mean as far as those percentages dipping. I guess the question that I'm not asking so well is, why is the straight line, why is it dipped from the etched line, right? So if we're still comparing ELA to ELA, am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
That it went from 64 to the expectation of 50, 60 to 48, 55 to 45, 57 to 47, and so forth. Sorry for the lack of clarity there. I see what you mean as far as meeting proficiency at each level and how the difficulty of that may be increasingly more difficult or decreasingly, depending upon how they move from grade to grade. I guess the question I was asking was, what is the rationale besides declining performance of these students at each grade? Let's just stick to third grade to make this easy for me to explain, because I'm not explaining it very well. Why did they go from 71 to 55? Why did they go from 64 to 50?
I got you. So that's a question that the state has explained and however they want to explain it. We're going to go through this and talk about the wave in different ways of how we're going to adjust to this. So as Yvette said earlier, like, we're not going to sit here and say, oh, great, hey, 10% more of our kids met, like, whoo, we did a great job. That's not how we want to look at it. But we're going to use this more of a kind of a benchmark within it. Like, here's this thing sitting here. We understand the difficulty changes a little bit. So we're going to adjust from that difficulty, and we end up calling it the wave, because I'm going to make a nice point. You're like, okay, we're here, there. And as a state, like, we're going to move with them, and we're going to stay above them, and we're going to talk about benchmarks and how we want, relative to them, how we want to move. So I will tell you briefly, the best explanation I got from the state was this. And the 11th grade level, a meets was this mark. The student that met was considered college and career ready and could do certain things. And there were a large percent of students that were below that line saying, I went to college, I went to somewhere, I went to Eastern, I went to somewhere, I got a degree, I'm successful, but you could continuously tell me that I'm not, and it wasn't a few kids, it was quite a few kids. So this idea of college is big, right? You can go to, as the state used, Eastern Illinois, and you could go to Harvard. I don't think we consider Harvard and Eastern Illinois the same, but they were in the same college and career bucket. So the state looked at that and tried to make some decisions on how to make an adjustment to that. And they were trying to be like, look, you're going to go to a college, you fit within this. That feels good because it keeps kids that are going to a college in a place it describes in a good way. We're going to present to you a little bit how that's nice, but we also want to make sure we stay up here towards that higher line. In fact, we want to go on beyond it. So I get what you're saying. It's an excellent question. And as we get to another part, we'll come back, and I think this will help make sense on what we're going to do to it. But you're right, it is less, but we're not going to settle for that.
And what I would say, again, not speaking on the behalf of the state through their research, their analysis, their individuals who participated in this, felt like the state of Illinois' proficiency levels were much higher than many other states. And in some graphics that were provided to us, they are at literally the top bar. There might have been one other state that was, or were we number one? We were number one. So what they said was, we want to make sure that ACT, and really does fit into where we're trying to be, that ACT is that bar, and everything should cascade down from that bar. But even with the state's proficiency levels, they felt, based off of their experts, that our state proficiency level was even higher than the ACT piece of the proficiency. What it took to be proficient at the ACT level was different than what it was proficient level at the state level. And then once they pulled all of the proficiency levels for all 50 states, they saw Illinois at the very top end of the most rigorous ability to be considered proficient than any other state. That was what we understood it to be, and what they did was, again, trying to map it to ACT, which makes a lot of sense for us, as that is that college and career guidepost for us and for most districts. We want to be using that. That should be our guidepost from, again, IAR starts in third grade. We should be using that as a progression marker for us, which, again, to Mr. Shazar's point, I think how we're going to be using it is very different than almost every other district around, and I believe others will join us in the work that we're doing. But if I were to speak from the state, I believe that was the main decision point to adjust the proficiency levels.
So when we go back to slides 4 and 5, there's at least 4 changes that are reflected between those two by the state, really, some of which are in our favor, so to speak, and some of which are challenges for us. For example, SAT to ACT, that's a challenge for us.
Yep.
But you'll notice that the scaling and the definitions become consistent across the 3 test types. So what Dr. Gordon's describing is, from ACT back, we have at least, and this is the beneficial part for us, the same set of scores. Now, they've also changed the definitions of the categories within the scale. And I think the challenge, when we say, you know, the states at the top end, I think what Dr. Gordon's saying is the state of Illinois had the most stringent definition of proficient. Not that the most students were proficient, but they had the most stringent definition relative to other states. So that definition has become more consistent across states, and then more consistent within the test types that we use to measure success. So some puts and takes, if you will, between what's good for us and what's a challenge for us. I think it's also an opportunity that we happen to be looking at reframing our own district-wide definitions of achievement at the time these changes have been made. I do think the presentation will get into the way we react to the state's definition and the way we use it in our own measures as an input and a way to track our own distance from the state as a measure, rather than the state itself's definitions as a measure. And I know that's coming in the doc.
Thank you. The last slide here with that relative difficulty index data, just calling attention to the difference, for instance, within math from 3rd to 8th grade, and essentially that relative difficulty increasing significantly along the same time we're increasing content and the complexity of the content as well. So this is something we'll watch closely. We can use this wave to start to map out what needs to occur in our classrooms and our buildings, and where we see celebrations and successes, and where we need to support for additional growth as well. So we're going to come back to that guiding question we had in this section. How do those proficiency levels that are set at the state and national level impact the interpretation of our data? I mean, frankly, how we will use it is sort of the predictive wave pattern. What is this wave pattern that we should be aware of as we're looking at our own data to help contribute to our interpretation of our D303 performance data? And we'd like to do that by looking at cohorts over time. So how are our students moving through those grade levels relative to where the state shows us students would be reaching proficiency? So it gives us almost a predictive component, but it really is meaning that we're adding to a number. When we say 70% of students at a particular grade level met or exceeded, it has a lot of meaning. But when we say 70% met or exceeded, last year 65 met or exceeded, and we would have anticipated a drop in performance based on that wave pattern, that has an exceptional amount of meaning for those of us who are helping to lead efforts and improvement, for principals, for educators to have more understanding than they've had before. So we're hoping that that background information is helpful for you as well as it was in our work. As we move into the second section, this is really where we're going to get into the charts and graphs and snapshots and opportunities for items that we could add to the student achievement report. We welcome your please give us your input and your questions and your thoughts. None of the charts and graphs in this section are intended to be interpreted as our accurate data. We have tried to note that on every slide. Please know in some cases they are on the way to being our data, but not quite complete. So please just know that if you look at it and when I ask about what happened in a particular grade level, please know it's just generally fictitious data. As we move. But we wanted to give you something that looks real so you can get a sense for the way in which we would represent the data.
As we set the stage for our conversation about enhancing the SAR, it's important that we first anchor ourselves in the purpose. We believe the purpose of the SAR is to serve as a communication tool that provides big picture views of student achievement, leaning into normed assessments aligned to our standards, along with the impact belonging has on student outcomes. The SAR should provide valuable information and insight at the board table, in the classroom, and within the community. We see the SAR as a connectivity tool that allows us to measure, monitor, and act upon student data relative to our structural objectives, our strategic plan, and our academic goals. We're going to pause here to check in on whether or not where we are, what we are presenting as it relates to the purpose is on track with your perspective of the purpose as we continue our conversation about the enhancements.
Dr. Christensen, one of the things that the board talks about often is the allocation of resources to improvement programs. And I wonder what your thoughts are on how the statement of purpose includes the board's necessity for the allocation of resources and the board's responsibility for looking after student performance on behalf of the community.
I think when I look at that actionable data, that's really looking at what is the data telling us, what are the trends, how are we comparing, and if there are areas where we need to focus and we need to enhance and we need to take action, then that's going to direct what is that action, what is the cost of that action fiscally, but also through many other avenues.
One of the things I think we may have the opportunity to do differently in the future when we start looking at cohort data is to look at specific programs and when they were implemented to see if we create discontinuities in a positive way with the implementation of programs. So for example, we spent last year or the last 2 years on PLC implementation. We know when that started. We know we're hitting a stride. We can now look at a line that says, at this point, a vertical line on some of these charts that says, at this point, we introduced something new and different. Does the D303 cohort performance line start to diverge in a positive way?
I think that's one of the exciting components of the enhancements that we're going to be talking about in the coming slides, is how that can be embedded within the structure of the graphs, within each cohort's progression through our system.
Sorry, I'll turn on my mic. In light of the background information on the wave patterns of proficiency, the next section of tonight's presentation will share administration's proposed enhancements to the student achievement report structure. After sharing the proposals, we will seek board input and additional considerations for the SAR structure. Our new proposed analysis would allow us to closely monitor each student cohort's performance to identify notable trends in growth. This will also allow us to capitalize on what's working well for our learners, what may not be yielding desired results for students, and identifying structures for early intervention. The next few slides will show how the wave patterns can provide a stronger predictive analysis of student learning outcomes. This will allow us to provide a visualization of student performance comparative to benchmark and aspirational districts. It also allows us to represent the impact curriculum implementations have on student learning by cohort, which is something the board has asked us to monitor closely.
Can I ask a question? I think it fits here. Some of our aspirational districts are not K-12. So if we're looking at, how are we going to compare third graders to when a high school doesn't have the third grader, they have third graders coming from 5 different districts. How will we, is that a way to do that? Okay.
Take it. So we have our K-8 aspirational districts and our high school districts. And our K-8 aspirational districts, essentially, they feed into our high school districts, not perfectly, because we have odd configurations in Illinois. So what we do is we take a weighted average of the aspirational districts, of the benchmark districts, and we say, across all of these, you guys have third grade, you guys have fourth grade, you have 8th, you guys have 9th, 10th, 11th. So we create a longitudinal line doing it that way. And it's not perfect, but these are the districts that we say, like, okay, that's an aspiration to achieve like that. And so we just string it across that way.
So what you see in front of you is a representation that we've created that we think meaningfully begins to compare performance with benchmark and aspirational districts. You can see in this sample 4 different lines. One that, again, fictitiously, represents D303 data, one that represents that benchmark weighted average that Mr. Jazar just mentioned, one that represents the aspirational district weighted average, and then, of course, the state line near the bottom there. And we've already talked a bit about how we know these lines wouldn't necessarily be expected to be linear, right? We've seen that, we understand that from background information. But when our D303 line is not linear, we also have to ask why, at which points. So is that due to proficiency level changes? Is it due to strategic moves by educators that we see exceptional growth when we didn't expect it? Is it due to further learning that educators have done? Is it due to a curriculum implementation? Is it due to a program implementation or change? So we can start to look at this over time in a way that allows us to evaluate our wave as compared to other waves as well. So we're getting the comparison with other districts that we've talked about at the board table previously, but then we're also watching our gaps. So as we watch these cohorts change over time, what we hope we see is a larger gap from the state line as we move along, and then shrinking, or I'd like to say surpassing, our aspirational lines that appear on our graphs as well. So the goal in this section is about what can we create for the board and others that creates meaning from our data. We are more than happy to provide charts of data and numbers all day long, of course, but what can we also do that creates meaningful conversation, that creates meaningful analysis with our staff members as well. It allows us to make moves. By watching the cohorts specifically, we can also, as you see here, watch them as they move throughout the grade levels. So we know each year how that particular cohort is progressing relative to how we might expect them to progress, so that we can call attention to those specific successes and standouts as well.
I ask another question. I know it's possible, could we keep an eye on a cohort of kids who have been with us from day one? So we know that we end up with kids coming in around second and third grade. Is there something that does that have an impact?
We could definitely do that. Just for this particular graph, putting our benchmarks on it, it's the data we have available. So that's something we could do, but that's one where you'd have to say, here's a specific population. I can't tell you who the kids in the benchmark districts were there from day one to day X. But I think those kinds of things are where we want to dig into certain things. So like if we have a particular high level of mobility, let's just say in a group, then that becomes an interesting fact, because we want to look at, as a result of what the district did, here's what we get. Well, you should be in the district, is we're going to measure it that way. That doesn't mean we have to say it sometimes, we know we have great mobility, we have to adapt to that idea. So there's always a what's next, but to what I believe your point is, like when we get into more specificity, then we can have more specific actions that are targeted. So everything's about understanding, and then there's a list of 100,000 things to do, and then we pick the high leverage things and the things that we think are going to have the most impact.
Because overall, our district, I believe, 1 to 2% of a mobility rate. So that's really not going to do much when we're talking about these overarching topics. But when we go into potentially the multilingual aspect, mobility and continuity within the program itself really matters. And we talked about that as the committee co-chairs and the team. Where and when do we apply some of those different metrics to make that meaning out of the data? And becomes very explicit when you're able to see it in that manner. So we've definitely thought along those same lines, but being more precise when we use it and not on our overall data, because in this one instance, it's such a small overall number, it won't shift the data.
So here's an example of what it would look like for a cohort of students that's only been with us a few years while we've been tracking that data and information. And it may seem like there's not a lot here, but actually there is. One of the things we've talked about is being able to be really aware of a cohort's performance each and every year. And in this case, we can already see, fictitiously, but we can already see the slope of our line that might be changing. We can already see a trend that might be emerging or a conversation that might be worth having by tracking this closely, even at the early grades. So it doesn't just become sort of let's look back when they're done with us. It's also each year, how is this particular cohort tracking? And to your point, that cohort could be a grade level of students, but it could also be a group of students. It could be a group of students that the board is interested in watching through goals. We have a lot of options in front of us for how we might apply this type of model to get some comparison instead of just perhaps looking at us compared to us, or students changing each year with the hope that they would increase in a linear fashion. So this, again, would help us to watch those gaps.
One of the things we may have the opportunity to evolve into is looking at, for example, a 5-year average for a cohort to make a projection of this particular cohort for whom we have only 3 years of data, to say, are they on track with at least the 5-year running average of performance of cohorts for D303, or are they trending ahead? Now, analytically, we can look at that and say, is there something positive that we're doing in this early stage that can be replicated or reinforced? And so I think there's a host of opportunities there. That's going to get a little bit more challenging for Mr. Chizar to run, but the potential is certainly there.
I have just a quick question. I know this is a sample, but my assumption, and I want to not make an assumption. So to clarify, my assumption would be that also individual schools would get a report that shows how they are trending compared to the district as a whole. Is that correct?
I think one of the themes in this is, and I think Dr. Gordon said it, which I love, from the boardroom to the classroom, but then across everything. We don't want to have 25 different representations of the data. Like, we're all in the same game, we're all rowing the same way, so to speak. So it's this representation, and then we segment the population underneath it. So if we go forward with this, this becomes our primary visual display, and then it's, okay, I'm gonna look at it by this, I'm gonna look at it by this. And there's lots of combinations in there, but that's what we want to do. And again, it's playing it back against this. I think there's going to be a lot of power in some simplicity, and we're able to get more complex. Because we're all on the same page, we're going to have common conversations where we're just a little bit fragmented right now in terms of like what this group wants or this group or this. Like, creating some clarity here, I think, is going to be a nice step forward for us.
So will the building principal get the same thing as this in essence, but for their population?
Yeah,
Is
so
that
what we've put together and designed is essentially sort of a district data team that looks not just at district data, but then also disaggregates each building's data and creates an analysis and a breakdown of each of the assessments that they give. And then that moves into our continuous improvement process. So now, instead of having to spend time living in the data and trying to interpret it, Mr. Chizar and I and a few others are going to spend time doing that for them at their building level, and then also feeding into their continuous improvement process. So now when they are going to set goals, they already have that information at their fingertips. They don't need to go search for it. Yeah.
One of the goals of this whole exercise for us was to ensure that the SAR did not just live one night in November at the board table. As glorious as that night is, it brought no, quite honestly, other meaning to everyone else in the organization. So what we're hoping is exactly your question, is that it starts to unfold at Fearson Creek, and it looks at Fearson Creek with all of the different disaggregation of data, but Fearson Creek has but they also connected back to this larger SAR as a building. And to us, that's the boardroom to classroom, and I think that's been a huge missing piece for us. The other piece you're not going to see as much is a hefty report filled with bullet points and other pieces that, quite honestly, outside the board, I'm not sure who is reading it. We want to make our data clean. It's this visible learning that when people see our data, they understand our data better. We want to be telling our story better than what we have been, and that's no shot against anybody. It's just we want to continue to improve our ability to communicate more clearly how well D303 students, educators, and others are doing in our district. And we really believe this is that first iteration. This will only continuously get better. We're excited about it, but it's almost wait till you see us in 5 years with where we're going with this, because I think these next few slides are truly transformative in how people in school districts are going to be looking at data.
So could I just, to tag on to that, because my question was, the problem with the IAR is it's an autopsy. And so it's really hard to know, and I totally agree that the cohort thing is going to, do you think it will change the way they look at data throughout the school year? Will looking at cohorts and having the SAR be the catalysts to look at how I look at my data throughout, not waiting just for IAR?
Yes, this is really an important component to it, and the upcoming superintendent goals under continuous improvement, under the building instructional leadership teams, truly spending that time understanding their data. But what is super important for us is that we have a district data team that pulls apart that data for our schools, because I think that's where a lot of it started to become bogged down and it became too tedious to do the work. We need to step in, fill that gap, and then give it to our schools. Again, with the overarching data, this data is really important, but then they start connecting it back to their summative assessments, their combative assessments, and starting to see linkage and connection through those as well. So we see this as a really important engine that literally drives those school level conversations, but always coming back here to see where we at on our multilingual students. How are we doing in these different areas?
I also think an important component to your question is the honest answer of we probably need to do more and different for them if we want things to feel different. And when we talk about disaggregating some of this for the buildings, we are talking about more than the numbers, even though tonight I feel like we're just talking about numbers, but we're talking about more than the numbers. We're getting into the standards and the evidence statements to be able to say to a fourth grade team, these actually, if you're wondering where to set goals, these 3 particular skills are the ones that, as we broke apart the students in this building, they really need support with. That's comforting, right? To know that students need something in particular is different than knowing they need something and now I need to go find out. So we're really trying to transform our transparency and specificity, and I think that potentially could be some of the key to making that really actionable. This representation allows us to go ahead and kind of place in there when some of those implementations happen, curriculum implementation. We can actually note that in sort of a vertical way on these graphs as well, so that we stay informed as to how things are going.
And maybe I missed it, and I very well could have, but one of the important aspects to this is we're no longer going to focus just on a few cohorts. Every cohort really matters to us. So when you see slide 19, you're going to see this for, I've got 4th grade or is that 5th grade? You will see this for every grade level. Again, you're going to see some that do not have a whole lot of data on it. We potentially could do some projections there as well, but we're saying the board will see each cohort on a regular basis here, which we believe is really important for our students. And it goes back to that boardroom to classroom. So it is impacting Pearson as it is impacting Belgraham or Richmond. Sorry.
This next one it's similar, but also just gives you an idea of a representation that we can pull forth. For instance, if there were a particular area that the board or administration wanted to dive really deeply into. So for instance, we could look at our English learners as a cohort themselves. It doesn't just have to be a grade level or graduating class. And as we do that, we can pull it apart. As Mrs. McCabe mentioned earlier, we could look at it based on how long they've been with us in the district. We could certainly look at it relative to being special ed as well. Like if we have a special education student who is also an English learner, we could also do some pulling out of Spanish speaking versus non-Spanish speaking. We could really play with this data and represent that in a variety of ways. If we were, for instance, going to look at specifically Spanish speaking multilingual learners, we could do that. Please know that we don't have access to other districts' data down to that granular level, but what we could do is take our Spanish-speaking multilingual learners, for instance, and compare it to some of our groups. So there are opportunities within this if you have feedback and input where we can get granular when it's important to get granular on the groups that we're watching closely.
So before you go here, I see in the blue chart, the blue box, all of these potential student groups. For which one of these would we have comparative data from the other districts?
We should have all of those, but the one limitation would be in the multilingual by language. We would not have that. And as we talk about, let's stick with multilingual for a moment, we would have access test data, but that would be our district. We would not have comparative access test data with other districts, but we could compare our multilingual learners' performance on, for instance, IAR with other districts. So there's some smaller limitations there.
Yeah, just, if it's a singular variable, we should be able to do it. Once we have multiple variables, this and this, that's when we lose that level of detail.
So this serves as a reminder of where we can dig a little deeper. There are a variety of state and national assessments that we give. We just wanted to break those out for you so you have a level of clarity about what we can bring to you. We certainly can bring access test data, IAR data, ACT and pre-ACT data for our students. AP exam data is available to us. Illinois Science Assessment in grades 5 and 8. For those of you who may or may not be aware, there used to be an Illinois Science Assessment for grade 11. The science test within the ACT has replaced that, so they're not taking 2 science tests in grade 11.
Are we giving any district-level assessments that can follow this same disaggregation? We do, I know we do it for belonging. I-ready. I only, maybe not at the board level,
Sure.
but so that if teachers are going to start looking at this differently, will they look at our district level stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. This particular reporting is really based on state data. The iReady data, for instance, we hope becomes continues to be actionable at the classroom and building level. It is harder for us to interpret relative to the instructure going on, but it is much easier for building and teachers to be monitoring and then using that as more of a formative tool. So this would really rely on the state data. However, there's a belonging component that we'll talk about later too. So as we move forward, our next question, how can subject area performance data, as measured by the ACT specifically, support planning and future opportunities? We know that it's a focus to plan our students' post-secondary opportunities as much as we can with them. And we want to set up systems that allow us to do that. So how do we connect that to student achievement data? If we're not careful, it sits over on the side, and students are making decisions alongside that, but not necessarily realizing the connection. So is there a meaningful way that we then report data and also connect it? So the next few slides I'm going to take you through are a brainchild, if you will. And we'd really like your input and feedback. We have developed something that we think could be really helpful for our students, really helpful for our counselors and those who advise students and our educators. And we'd like to give it to you in its infancy to see if this is an idea that the board feels like meets the needs of all of our constituents. So we'd like to introduce you to a proposed addition called the Opportunity Scale. And there's, I think, lots of conversations about what a particular benchmark might be. Like, what does it mean to be proficient, right? That's a state conversation. We understand that's a valuable conversation. But in lieu of a number, in lieu of one number, how do we actually see our students in all of the opportunities that could sit in front of them? And is there some creative way that we as a district could step outside of what districts typically do and say, what if we were able to somehow create a picture of the possible opportunities, not just that you have, but if you want to work towards, here's what you could do to do that early and often. How could we do that? So as we thought about the concept of future opportunities, Mr. Chazar was able to dig in and grab onto clearinghouse data. And this is data for where our District 303 graduates our graduates, have graduated from. Where have they gone within the collegiate system, and where have they had their, what we'll call a terminal degree? So for instance, let's say we have a student who graduates and moves on to ECC. They complete a degree there. They graduate, and that's their highest education. That would be their terminal degree. But we also have students who go off to ECC and take some of those gen eds, and then they move on, and perhaps they graduate from University of Illinois. Then that would be their terminal degree that we would work from in the clearinghouse. So the idea is, if we have this data sitting out there that Mr. Chazar was able to curate, is there some way we could use this to inform our current students as to where our former students have gone and achieved and what they've done? And then once we've done that, is there some way to then tie that back to the classroom and the skills that they might want to gain or grow or enhance in order to get to a place where they can see themselves? And we've started first with the college university side, but we're also exploring the career side and have curated some information there as well. So what you see, and this is factual, I will say that the colleges and universities up there are representative of our actual D303 grads. That is factual. There are many more that are listed. We just picked a few. And it's basically the buckets that our students have sort of placed themselves into by choice, and where they've earned those degrees over time alongside that ACT score. Now, we know there's a lot more that goes into getting into college and moving into post-secondary goals than ACT scores, but we also want to acknowledge that ACT scores are coming one way or another. They are indicative of a level of knowledge and understanding of something, and perhaps that's a score that can be enhanced, matched up with future opportunities. How do we do that? Like, how do we help them to do that? So what we came up with is the opportunity scale, where we would essentially have a color-coded scale that we would actually incorporate into the student achievement report that would let you know how our students are faring, right? Where are they at? But at the same time, it gets more powerful. As we dug into those buckets, let's say the ACT score range 28 to 32 for ELA, and again, this is actual, though that score range actually correlates to really specific skills that are demonstrated on the ACT. So if I'm at a 26 and I really want to go to University of Illinois, and I get the sense that I'm going to need to be in the 28 to 32 bucket, but I'm really trying to increase my ELA score, these are the skills that are actually aligned with that score. Can I do these things? And which ones can't I do yet? And how do I work on that? And at the same time, while that's great for a student, it's really meaningful for an educator. And last year, when we transitioned into this taking ACT instead of SAT, we started this conversation with our educators. Where are students introduced to these objectives, these college and career objectives? Where are they cemented? What does it look like? It becomes more valuable when we take it just from, hey, where do you want to go to school? Or what career would you like to be in at the end of the day? Or would you like to go off to the military? To what does it look like to actually get to what your goals are? And it's okay if your goals are a little loftier than you're sitting at right now, because we have some scaffolds in place to help.
So I love this, and I saw it, a day or two ago when I was looking at it, and I think it could be very motivating for students. How will it be shared with, the assumption, right, would be that with their, is it a counselor or their team, but I know their time with them is so limited, and this would be an in-depth conversation. So I think this is fabulous, but how will students get that information and understand it?
I think that's a really good point. I think the initial conversation is with the educators around these particular standards. So if I'm your teacher and I have an awareness early on of which skills you're able to demonstrate, I'm already planning alongside not just my priority standards, but these college and career objectives as well, so that I'm maximizing, just as an educator, as our educators do every day, trying to maximize the learning for the student. So what we're saying is, we could actually give that more meaning even for our educators first as they stand in front of students, rather than just saying, here's a list of objectives that ACT says all kids need to know, right? We can start to help them understand and norm into what does it mean to be at a 28 to 32. We know, you are right, we don't have a ton of time with our students to advise, but the little time we do have, we might need to reflect on that. How do we bring that in? I think your question is the one that we end up asking if this is a place the board would like to go, is what does that look like for a student? I will say as we assess on the road to ACT, when we do our early October assessment, we actually do get a good amount of data and information, but so does a student. And one of the additions of this October's testing as compared to last year is we did not have the capability last year for individual students to kind of get I'm going to say like their own customized improvement plan from how they did on this early on testing prior to taking ACT or pre-ACT. This year we're going to have that. So students individually will not just see how they did in the fall, but they're also going to get sort of a customized interactive plan with what they need to work on. Teachers get that as well. Within the system, buildings get that as well. So last year we looked at what are the top 3 to 5 skills that you as an entire school, post-testing in the fall, need to work on. That was really valuable. Teachers can look at that as well within the system. They can actually pull out their classes and say, oh, interesting, my second hour English class really has these top areas of need. My fifth hour, totally different ones. So all along the way, it's just a more customized way maybe to get to learning.
And will all teachers at the high school level be trained on that? Like, so we just got to go to both high schools today, right? So are you just training the ELA teachers and the math teachers, or are science and history and culinary, and is everyone going to be trained on this?
Yeah, last year we started a little bit, it came on kind of quickly. So we started with the standards in August and introducing high school, it was all high school staff in August, the entire staff.
I think there's potential for everyone to contribute,
Yeah.
right? Not just the core area teachers.
I think you're absolutely right. I am reminded of a wellness educator who said to me, if there's some way that we can be involved in really getting kids excited about achieving more, and like even if we want them to complete a certain amount of things a week, and we'd be happy to track that in wellness. Like that's what we do, is we're all about setting goals and achieving them. And I think there was some interest last year, and now we'll be able to build on that. So as this data starts to come out after we have our October data, that's when all those conversations can really start. We don't want to leave anybody out, because we know, as I mentioned to the high school educators last year, you may think because you're a wellness teacher or a culinary teacher that you are not the one to have a conversation about how a student's performing on an ELA ACT test. You would be surprised, because most of them expect to hear that from their English teacher. But it's really impactful when it comes from somebody who is not. And more importantly, you took that test. It opened up opportunities for you, which is why you're standing here, and there's a story to tell there. So we are trying to open all the doors for all the staff.
So do I hear you rightly that you're really working two separate but interrelated issues? One is how to take the indicators and standards and skills that are tested in ACT and really understand when and where from 11 down to K those skills should be introduced and then practiced. And then a second issue, which is how do you get feedback to individual students about his or her performance on pre-ACT so that that individual can map their own short-run path to the next test. Is that about right?
That's absolutely right, Mr. Lackner. And I would say on your first point, that cascading back of standards is imperative. I mean, as we look up there, these are our actual objectives. And while it may not seem all that exciting to say use punctuation to set off a non-essential, non-restrictive, a positive, or clause, I'm sure we're all doing that every day. What that trickles back to at some point within the learning in English, boy, if I'm a 6th grade English teacher, I kind of want to know that later that's going to be assessed, not because I'm going to teach it in 6th grade, because can you help me understand what I should be focused on to make sure they can get there later? So the cascading back is a key aspect to this too.
You mentioned briefly about career.
Yes.
And I hope that we can begin to look at these skills and say, what does it take to build a house? What does it take to manufacture? And talk to our businesses, because then kids who aren't going to go to college or still have an opportunity to get a good ACT score, because it will help me to get a job or to get into a trade that I didn't expect.
That's a great point. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to bring this forward, is we're starting to really dig in and do a lot of that work. We're looking at the electricians union. We've gotten information back. We've looked at the ASVAB. We want to know, do we keep digging on this? Is this something the board feels like is a valuable use of our time to invest and continue to invest in the work we're doing around this? Yeah.
I would also say something about the military, that if you score well in the military, your entrance may look different than if you don't. Because kids who aren't, okay, ACT means nothing to me. No, it does. And besides that, it isn't the score, it's the skills you've shown you know.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I love all of this. I think this is great work. The only thing I would say around the career thing, devil's advocate, however we position it, I would not want it to be interpreted then by the students that they're limited. Because they can turn their trajectory around. If they're interested in med school, for example, but they just need to get what they need to get into college, and then college is really what proves that for the med school. So just an example.
That's a great point. The other piece to that I'm glad you brought that up, is while we have clearinghouse data for colleges and universities, we do not have clearinghouse data for trades and military. So what we would be building is, we're trying to build alongside something that's more informative in nature, but not necessarily based on where our graduates have been. Now, do I think we might have an opportunity to collect some of that in the future? Perhaps, but it's not in place yet. So we would be curating things, I think, to your point, which is really important. We're curating things for them, but we have to be careful that we are providing that information meaningfully without saying, this is where you end up, right? Like, that is not the goal. It's simply, do you know that, for instance, to move forward in the electricians union, you need to have the equivalent of a year of algebra successfully, B or above, like that type of thing, so that they understand that criteria.
That was a piece that Mrs. Hancock, during the co-chair meeting, was adamant that the scale never once limited somebody's ability to see that. So I would hand it to you if you wanted to expand on that, because I think that was a really important piece. To your point, Mrs. Vergrave, you can look at this and feel like, oh, this is the only place I can be it whatever the gradient of color is here, and worrying about where do I land, as we see it, is all these opportunities to continue to grow, and that we know through these evidence statements, we know how to grow, and it's not a set line that you're on, but you have all these opportunities to continue to open whichever doors you want. We've talked about the door metaphor and the importance of our students making those choices, but we've got to show them those pathways through this. And why I love this so much, because it connects to our APG. These things are starting to stack on top of each other that allow our kids and our families and our educators to start seeing and truly living, as I'm pointing up to our commitment statement, together building pathways to excellence. All these pieces start to build together, from school links to the APG to the opportunity scale. All of these aspects allow our families and our students and our staff to have very different conversations about how to get where they want to go to. So I apologize if I stole your thunder. I didn't realize we're getting ready to push over there.
No, I appreciate you mentioning that, and you brought up school links, and I'm thinking about how, like, this is all so interconnected. this is why I joined the board, because, why I ran for the board, because these are the kinds of things that are exciting, right? Like, this is moving our district in a direction where every student can see themselves in the future in a lot of different ways. So I like this. And I'm glad that Dr. Gordon brought up school links, because I wonder, when we were talking about like limited time with our counselors, but we also know that they can be assigned tasks, right? So are you envisioning that they will kind of dig into some of this through school links as an assignment?
I think there will be some natural, and Dr. Christensen, feel free to jump in, but I think there's going to be some natural overlap here. We're tiptoeing into a little bit of the work that School Links does, but we're bringing the academic component with the objectives into it. So I think that the thing that is consistent is what's the next logical thing I should do? Like, wherever I want to be, what's the next logical thing I should do? And that's something that School Links takes them through, that counselors take them through. But now we're actually talking about what's the next logical thing I should do academically. Should I be stepping into an APG pathway or sign up for a particular course because it's going to grow me in this area, right? That feels different than, I guess I just need to take this class next year. So I think there's some overlap there.
Yeah, I think the alignment of the tasks as well as the storage of all of the information that is collected through the student's engagement in the tasks will be able to not only be visible to the student, but also to the counselor and also to the family, so that they can be a part of that conversation. And I earlier today was getting a little geeked out about things, because I'm thinking, okay, so I do a career inventory in School Links. I see what my scores are on these assessments. I know what I would like to do. So I've got this career aspiration, based on my inventory, based on my interests, and now I'm excited about it. I can see where the potential is. Then I can go into the APG and I can see, okay, well, that aligns with this particular pathway. And in order for me to succeed, I can join these clubs to help me on that. I can also get involved in these in these elective classes. I can take these more rigorous classes that are going to help me to build these skills. Like, I just see all of this swirling together in such a beautiful picture. Super powerful. We're not there yet, but I see that, speaking of pathways, there's a pathway to get there. And when I think about transformation of high school or transformation of education, I think it's the conversations. It's not the things, it's not the tools, it's not the scores. It's the conversations that happen with so many different people, including counselors, including educators in the classroom, including families and student to student, that's where the transformation is going to happen.
I really think this slide 25 is incredibly important for us, because these standards that ACT measures a student's proficiency in, yes, they're measured by ACT, but they're measured by other test mechanisms as well. So you mentioned ASVAB, you mentioned the military. Almost no one can score in the 90s on ASVAB unless they have physics skills. The military assigns jobs based on an individual inductee's ASVAB score. So whether the test is ACT or the test is ASVAB, then the knowledge or the skill around physics capabilities is what you're backflushing through the teacher's experience, and tested in ASVAB, tested in ACT. Physics skills is physics skills. So I really appreciate that backflush that's reflected here on slide 25 into the ways that teachers are addressing the students.
So we know, and not to disparage anybody who does get excited by semicolons, but we might not have, nobody believes that, Dr. Gordon. But this, as a statement about learning how to use semicolons, may not be overly inspirational to a student, or perhaps it is. They may not feel passionately about that, but they may feel passionately about, and teachers may be passionate about what opportunities learning more about semicolons could open up. Who knew semicolons could be so influential?
Clarity.
Clarity. That's right.
I have my copy of Strunk and White in my bag. Shall I take it out?
Hey, bonus points for the Strunk and White reference, man.
Just continuing along this line, we did stick this into an SAR conversation, and I want to drive that back too. I mean, how does this look to the board in the annual SAR as well? And Mr. Chazar and I have talked quite a bit about what this could look like, and how do we give a bird's eye view, the macro view, about how our students are doing relative to those opportunities. And once again, we are not trying to pigeonhole any student. We honor every student's individuality and the choices that they make, and we hope we can support each and every one of them to get where they would like to be. But we would essentially maybe present it in a sediment graph like you see here that gives you an idea, just a color-coded idea. We can actually back map this as well as to how students are sitting within that opportunity scale too. Did want to throw this in there. I know it came up earlier, and I'm so glad it did. Another proposed addition is to, as we said earlier, break it down by program impact or whatever the board decides is most important to track within the student achievement report. Data, and more data. Now you'll realize why I said it's going to feel very quantitative in nature. And again, we're still here with the graphs and the numbers. One key addition that we've talked about is deeper analysis of the college and career readiness data. So we have a few representations we'd like to share with you for your consideration. One, student participation in things like AP, dual credit, and articulated credit by cohort. We do have that information. We can prepare that information. We can watch that information. And if that is a particular focus area of the district and the board, then we want to make sure we represent that in the student achievement report. Another one could be our scholarly data. And this could take a variety of forms, but our AP Scholar data each year continues to grow. I think you'll see that again this year. And scholarly performance data. So as we have students who continually add more onto their academic plates, we recognize where we are with those trends as well. We could add in there scholarly data related to national merit, commended, and semifinalists. This sample shows you that bright lime green would be maybe, for instance, our commended students, the darker green are semifinalists, so that we have a sense of how that's trending as well. And then we can add representations of 5-year trend data and standout performance. Do we have students that are scoring 3, 4, or 5, getting college credit-bearing scores? We can also highlight standout performance, and as I will tend to do, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight standout performance because why wait? This is our 2024 data, but at least it gives you an idea. I mean, we have so many AP courses that just blow away the College Board success rate. So when we say success rate, we're talking about the percentage of students who walk away with college credit-bearing scores. And we have so many that are just top tier and far above what most schools would expect. And I think what's notable there too, and I'll keep saying this, is that our AP courses are open to all of our high school students, right? We allow students to challenge by choice. We have aspirational districts who limit that and say you can only do that in junior, senior year, and I think for good reason in their systems, and that makes sense for them. Or only certain students at certain times can access that. We really provide all opportunities. So when we see standout performance, it's all of our students who have opted into those opportunities up there. And I can tell you off the top of my head, there are an awful lot of freshmen and sophomores in some of those classes. So this is not just your juniors and seniors.
One of the reasons why these last 5 slides, I think this is an area that we can get better at in our district, is celebrating and championing the work that is occurring in D303. And I think this is a great sample on page 32 of our students, our staff, the structures, the systems that are getting put into place. But this is throughout all of these. The college and career readiness data, the sample data for our students who took one or more college and career classes. Each one of those pieces are areas for us we should be celebrating and championing that work that is going on, as opposed to somewhere in some appendix that no one's reading. This is an opportunity for us to push this information out to our community. So again, our community starts to understand even more the power and impact our district has on our students. So this is something that it was just incredibly important to include in our upcoming SAR data. Again, not that we haven't had it in the past, but it was generally in an appendix or somewhere that you had to dig deep into to find it. And we want to celebrate that and push that at the forefront of a really important data conversation in November. Sorry.
Absolutely. So we've given you a lot. That was a lot. I acknowledge that. A lot of different ways we can represent data, a lot of ways that we can start telling our story through the student achievement report from the boardroom to the classroom. Appreciate your feedback. We're going to shift to the final portion, which is, it seemed like a logical progression to at least open up this conversation, but the board can let us know if that makes sense. As we think about what we might be reporting on in the student achievement report, what we might be monitoring as a system, we've also begun to think about the upcoming academic goals and how do we marry that with some of the opportunities that we're putting into the student achievement report as well. So we've brainstormed some focus areas for academic goals. I don't know that we would consider these fully fleshed out because we really want that board perspective as well. But one of the things that we've talked about as a team is focusing in on every student meeting their expected growth on the state assessment in ELA and math. If we go back to the beginning of this presentation, which probably seems like eons ago, and I apologize, we talked about how that growth is not necessarily linear. So it becomes difficult to say, we're going to go up by a certain percentage each year, right? It seems disingenuous. At some points, we should probably expect more growth than that percentage, and other times not as much. So how do we maximize having that information, creating a goal, and then again, honoring the individualized nature of the growth that we're looking for? We're looking for each and every student to grow. We're not just looking for some students to grow. So in this case, we would take a student's starting score, match that with other students who earned that same score. And I'll walk you through an example in a moment here. And then take a look at their individualized expected growth target. And then we would expect them to exhibit above average change relative to that. Here's an example. This is an actual D303 student. This is not made up. So a student took the IAR in 4th grade in ELA, scored a 771. That was at the exceeds level. They came back the next year. They took the IAR for ELA in 5th grade, scored a 782, which was also at the exceeds level. And while we initially say that's wonderful growth, it may or may not be, right? We know that that doesn't give us enough information. The student's growth percentile was 81%. And that student growth percentile is actually a metric that's given to us by the state for each individual student, meaning that the student had more or the same growth as 81% of the students who scored the 771 the previous year. So if you look at all the kids who scored the 771, we look at how they all moved and grew when they took it that 5th grade year. This student grew at the 81st percentile. That would be more than 50%. We would be looking at more than 50%. So it's not just did you grow at all, did you grow at that 50% or more to show above average growth. That's a rigorous goal for an individual student. It's also a rigorous goal for a school district to track. So that's our first conceptual idea around the idea of an academic goal.
Is there any way you can do that with our aspirational? Probably not, right?
I wouldn't think so, because, thank you. I wouldn't think so because we wouldn't have an individual student's growth percentile, or Mr. Shazar will have that data file for each of our students. We would not have that type of access for any of our other aspirational goals, but I see his eyes in the looking up, so I'm wondering if he's thinking something different than I am.
So, two things. One, we've basically FOIA'd the state for every student score in the last 5 years.
Okay, we're good. We are good.
Obfuscating the student IDs, it's a bit of a
Why not?
We get FOIA'd all the time, let's try it out. We'll see how that goes. It seems straightforward, but it's a conversation in the moment. We'll be able to dig into some detail level with that, I'm hoping. We'll see how it goes. And there are some metrics we get on the school report card that I think we can at least, I don't want to say we can, but I think we can probably paint a decent picture. Just, hold that thought.
Yeah, I'm just going to say no for right now and allow Mr. Cesar to go back in his laboratory and figure this out. I'm worried about saying anything here tonight that would give you a false impression that we would be able to do that. So for right now, no.
Let us investigate that to give you for sure,
Okay.
one way or the other,
Okay.
an answer one way or the other.
Can I ask a question? So, the 50th percentile, right? Like if that's the expected growth target, that's what we're looking for. How did you come up with that number?
Yeah. You want to describe where the 50 is?
So that number comes up from, ISB does that. So imagine that they take all these fourth graders and they got a 771. So I got this bucket of students here. And then every student has a change in score to the next year. So there's a distribution. These guys grew -20, -19, all the way up to these guys grew 20. And it'll be a distribution, like with most kids, somewhere in the middle, and we'll get, because we have enough data. And so that distribution, then you can create a percentile rank out of that and basically say, oh, the kids that grew 11 points, they were above 81% of all of the students in that population. Does that make sense? Does it help?
Yes.
Okay.
And if we're saying the goal is 50, at the 50th percentile or more, how did you decide that was the number? That's my, so you're saying you're basing it on ISB or?
Well, the 50th percentile is average.
Okay.
It's whatever the average across this large population of students sits in there. And again, we're comparing this is an exceed student. The student's being compared to other students that have exceeded wherever they are. And so this is what it ends up being. I will tell you, it is, almost impossible for every kid to outscore every year, every time. You're going to have variation. Johnny had a bad day today, didn't have his best. Well, he didn't get the 50th percentile, but he comes back next year and does. So we ultimately look at the data with where are you at achievement and where are you at with growth. And we can have very high achieving students not making growth. And that's a data point that becomes a concern. When we see that over more than one data point, that becomes a bigger question. To be honest with you, by the time we can present that data and state test data, the teacher goes, I saw that 2 years ago, to Ms. McCabe's point. So we're kind of telling you about the system. Within that, we have educators making much more detailed decisions every day. This is kind of a health of the system. How are we doing? Are we getting more kids there than not? How many do we want? Are we going? I think I went way beyond the question you asked. I apologize for that.
Well, no, I appreciate that you dug into it a little bit more, because really what I'm trying to figure out is is that a realistic number? Are we setting ourselves up for, oh, that was easy, of course everybody's going to hit that 50th percent, or is it well, that's going to be a challenge?
I will say it this way. If every student is above average every year, not to steal from Garrison Keeler, but we would be like Wobegon, we're, everybody's above average and that's not really, sorry. I must be old, making references. Sorry, Joe, you got it. All right. But that's not really realistic. Everybody's always above average, that doesn't work. So, but would we ever want to say, we don't want everybody to do that? Then the answer is no. So it'll be kind of one of those questions of, there's our line, how close? Hey, we're moving this way, that's a problem. We're moving this way, we get a little better, we keep working. I think that's really the intent of this. To say that 100% of kids are going to be 100% proficient and make 100% of growth. That's what we want. That's what we're always going to aspire for. But to hold ourselves to that and beat ourselves up if we don't, that's not productive. So I think this is a good goal, and especially looking at this, it puts a bar on how do we keep moving towards it. I think after we do some things with this and spend some more time with it, if we want to talk more realistically about what that is and how we get our benchmarks and be a little bit more informed, it might become a different conversation. But I do think to start, let's go for it.
my understanding too, in reading this, is that the goal is that students meet expected growth, not that they all exceed it by more than 50%.
Well, the expected growth would be at that 50th percentile level.
Okay.
That's average.
Got it.
So we want the expectation is
But
everybody
this
hits average.
example, the student exceeded that. Our
This
goal
was-
isn't for them to exceed it.
Right, this is an exceed student
Yeah.
that exceeded the 50th, right? That's a lot of growth.
How will we measure growth at the high school? The 9 through 12, or 9 through 11?
Do you want to fight for it?
Because the state is putting performance levels at 9th and 10th grade now, and they're getting a little bit more involved in 9th and 10th grade data, we'll be able to have the growth percentiles. There will be a 8th to 9th grade gap year. We won't be able to make the leap from here to here. We can do some math and try to figure some things out, and maybe the state will. But at least from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, we'll be able to do those things as well.
Okay, thank you.
The second academic goal for consideration that we started brainstorming, again, this is a focus area, but it goes back to those meaning-making representations we'd like to give you visually, is to state that we'd like to close the gap with the aspirational districts. I still want to say crossover and surpass, and continue to grow the gap between the state in ELA and math achievement. So we're referring to it as improving the gap, so that we can grow it in the appropriate direction. And we can place some particular focus there with student groups who have experienced lower outcomes in the past, if that is a focus that the board would like to take as well. We can break that down in a variety of ways. So we would go back to those line graphs and be able to actually, we do have a quantitative table that I made Mr. Chizar take off because it took up a lot of room on a slide and looks confusing. But, thank you, by the way. But it would sit just under this graph and is actually numerical in nature, so it would say plus 4.5% or, minus 0.1%, that kind of thing, so that we would have an actual numerical, not just, hey, that line looks higher than this line, that must be good. We do have it broken down as well.
One of the things I think that's important to consider is that the state number fluctuates as well. And so when we grow the gap between the state, we like the idea of growing the gap when the state line is in an upward trajectory and not taking advantage of the fact that in some instances the state line might be declining. And so I think the numerical table helps illustrate some of that, but the visual points out if the D303 lines trend down at a rate different than the state or trend down at all, there's some challenge there. But I think it's the visual creates or illustrates that challenge as well as anything else.
Our third academic goal for consideration is for each student to participate in at least one post-secondary academic or work-based experience before graduation. The inclusion of this goal aligns the SAR with the strategic plan and high school experience structure, formally monitoring post-secondary experiences through participation rates in these activities by overall cohorts, also activity types and specific student groups would allow us to identify growth in each of the areas. This is an example of one of the ways that we would be able to capture our progress toward this goal of overall participation in identified activities as we look at cohort year over year. This next graph is a visual example of how we might capture our progress toward the overall participation in all identified activities relative to specific groups of students to better serve each group's needs. And then this last graphic is a visual example of how we might capture our progress toward the goal of overall participation broken up into different activity types.
Is this real data?
No.
You maybe, just before you publish it, you might want to just have a reminder.
Thank you.
And our final academic goal drafted for consideration centers around increasing our students' sense of belonging in District 303. Belonging is ever present in our district's core values, and we as a team acknowledge the importance of our students feeling accepted, appreciated, and treated fairly, and the impact that it has on sustaining academic achievement.
One of the things that we've talked about around the belonging goal is the nexus between belonging and academics. So I know it says academic goal up here, but we understand that the extreme importance that a sense of belonging can have on academic performance as well.
We have begun discussions about how to best capture progress toward student sense of belonging in District 303. We typically survey students multiple times each year, but we do worry about survey fatigue and creating opportunities for ownership at the school level. Our 5 Essential survey administered annually provides some insight into belonging. We are exploring opportunities to align our multiple sources of information in order to effectively measure, monitor, and respond to our students' sense of belonging.
So this would be what we've just reviewed. This would be the complete SAR minus some appendices that we talked about, right? What about, I'm curious of the discussion around attendance as a metric.
I think we can consider the attendance piece as a part of SAR as well, if that's what the board, we have plenty of data on that as well.
Did you talk about that though as a
I can't
team?
remember. We've had so many conversations, quite honestly, that I don't remember if we did or didn't.
Our last, oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say, our last meeting, we really only got through, our planning meeting,
Okay,
we really
yeah.
only got through the first part of this. We didn't
Okay.
get to goals 2, 3, and
Okay,
4.
gotcha.
To really like flesh that out. But I think that adding a component to attendance actually might fit well in belonging. Because if they feel like they belong, then they have a better, better
That's
chance that they're
kinda
going to
what I-
attend
Thank
school.
you for flushing that all the way out. I finally, to connect it to the belonging goal, not as its own goal itself, but a component of belonging would also incorporate the attendance aspect of it as well.
I'm not sure what that means. What do you mean connect? What do you mean? Yes, I think it feeds to a sense of belonging.
Yes.
But I guess I guess where I'm going is to actually have the targets like we have already related to attendance specifically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
We thank you very much for this. We recognize very dense presentation of a lot of information in one evening. We are so thankful for your input, and I know we have made some copious notes about the types of things that the board feels like are really important within what we presented, and also maybe what you'd like to see added. And we welcome continued input on this.
I just have a quick comment to make. Having been a co-chair with Mrs. McCabe over the last couple of years for learning and teaching, kudos to your group, kudos to the new chairs. For a long time, we discussed the need to make the SAR a little bit more visually appealing, things that we could draw insights from graphs with, to Mr. Lackner's point earlier, you can discern a lot from these graphs just by looking at them very quickly, as opposed to trying to read through very dense, thick narrative form representation and then trying to then find the appendices that is related to that so that you could then start drawing some conclusions and inferences from the data. So I think we're on a really good path here to simplify but then also enhance the process, right? So even though we're simplifying a lot of the data and the charts and so forth, I think that it's going to enhance the process, and I certainly appreciate the connectivity to some of the other things that we're doing within the district as well to enhance counseling and so forth, and program guide and the like. So I have about 6 pages of notes. I don't have a ton of to say immediately right now, but I'll review these and review the deck again and any other feedback I have. But I think we are really heading in a good direction here.
Mr. Kuchar, I just appreciate that, because there was a point during the last couple of years where I remember sitting up here and board members had their packet and we're literally pulling it apart and going to, this one on page 4 connects with it because you couldn't have that aspirational benchmark district, and this does everything that you're saying. It's on that one-stop shopping that you're able to see and understand quickly, how are we doing? How does this work? So yes, I vividly remember the pulling apart and ripping apart the packets and then trying to coordinate that conversation, which at times was a little challenging. So we see huge change and improvement in just the communication and the accessibility to the information, which was also a really important piece for all of us. How can our community access this information and really understand where are we at and where are we going?
We spend a lot of time taking a test on one day and what it means to kids. Remember, it used to rate all schools. We were failing or we weren't failing, and how it did politically. What I love about this is that now it takes a one-day test and it actually informs us, helps us to figure out what needs to change in the classroom, not waiting until everything's over. So I think the cohort is the right way. I love where you're going, and I think we can also tweak it as we find out. I went right away in my head to school improvement plans. This is going to have a big impact on. We're not going to say we're going to raise the score 2%. It's going to be about, okay, we got a group of kids, we've got an area, we've got skills we've got to do, we know where we're going. So again, those structures and all meeting together. So thank you very much. I know this is a lot of work, and I appreciate the product you're coming up with.
Okay, well, I guess we'll close with a couple of things. One, a thought, and then a charge. The thought is this: I think the admin's done a really nice job of offering us a new way to analyze the district's performance through the lens of student performance. So I'm really excited about that. And I think I want to thank the team for their creativity in thinking about how to think about student performance and for bringing that back to us. The charge is this: there was a lot covered tonight. I know folks had prep time to look at some of this prior to, but please do share your feedback on the pros and the cons and the gaps and the opportunities that reside here. We have some time to continuously improve this communication document. You can bring that back to the committee chairs. You can bring it back to the individual administrators as well. I think we'll take the task as the co-chairs of the committee to think about how to slate the rest of the conversation over the course of the year as to when we get into aspirations against any of these goals that the board might want to consider. Seeing no questions or comments, I will say that we adjourn the committee meeting here at 7:42. Thank you.